What a story, eh? Brings us right up to date, doesn't it? Things don't change, do they? It was the same in Joseph's time. It's so often the same today. We hear the same story, don't we? The story so far. Where was God in all this? And isn't that a saying that so many people say today with this virus situation and the situation in the world today? Where is God? I thought he was a loving God. These are sort of typical questions that people ask. But you see, people don't see the big picture, do they? It's like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? I don't know where you start your jigsaws, if you're one of those people. Perhaps you started in a little corner or something that strikes you out of the picture. But it's only a little piece, isn't it? We don't see the total jigsaw completed, unless you cheat and look at the box, of course. But, you know, some people say, well, yeah, God's got a plan, and if that plan doesn't work out, he reverts to plan B. But no, God has an ultimate plan, which he is carrying out, which takes time. Time to us is days and hours, isn't it? But to God, there is no such thing as time. But you notice in Genesis 39, verse 5, where our story begins, really. Joseph, last week we had a very good from Roger on the background of Joseph and his family, where he grew up and the problems that he had with his brothers, and how he was sold into Egypt, into the house of Potiphar, who was a captain of the guard and a very respected man, and probably a very rich man as well. And he was made overseer of his house and all that he had. That the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Can you imagine it? Joseph there, he was a slave, but his master saw that he had wonderful gifts. And we all have gifts, don't we? Perhaps we don't realize it, but the Lord has blessed all those that love him with gifts. And we use those gifts to glorify the Lord. Now, Joseph had an amazing gift of being able to organize. I don't know if you've got that sort of gift where you can organize things and put things into perspective. Some people like a muddle, don't they? They like living in a muddle. I'm one of the sort of people who likes things organized. And so it was with Joseph. And he showed this wonderful blessing that he had to his master, and he made him in charge of his house. And the Lord blessed the house because of Joseph there. All that was in the house and in the field, I expect. He went out into the field and organized the harvest and made sure that he got the best price for the grain and so on. So Joseph was a sort of person who was used by God all the time through his life. But you know, in our times of trials, sometimes we wonder why these things happen. We shouldn't question God, really, but we do question why certain things happen in our lives. Isaiah 55 verse 8 says, God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, saith the Lord. For as the heaven is higher than the earth, so are my ways and your ways, my thoughts and your thoughts. Or Proverbs 16:9 says, a man's heart plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. Someone has once said, man proposes, but God disposes. And that's very true for Joseph, isn't it? God had a plan for Israel and for Joseph, but it wasn't revealed to him. Now we read that he didn't question God. He didn't go to God and say, why? No, he trusted God. And that is an example to us, isn't it? Because it cost Joseph to stand up for what he believed. But in this story, we see there what it cost Joseph, because a woman was scorned. And Joseph had a temptation. And we read what it cost him to stand out against it. So just three simple things this morning. What is temptation? How do we handle it? And what help do we have to overcome it? Joseph was a very type of person who was very upstanding. He was a successful man. He was good looking. Not that we're good looking, but Joseph was very good looking. And he was young, unmarried. So he was an ideal perspective for any young woman who wanted a good man. There was Joseph. He was successful. He was in the house with his master, the Egyptian. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper. So temptation comes in many guises. We can be tempted by little things, thoughts, actions, or we can be tempted by bigger things like Joseph was. The same temptation can often come multiple times, not just once. And the dictionary definition of temptation is to entice, or to attract, or to invite, or to provoke. And we see in this story the difference between righteous Joseph and the unrighteous wife. There was Joseph. He could have had a bit on the side, couldn't we, as they say today? Why not? You know, Joseph had a decision to make. Let's just look at Joseph in depth and then at his wife and see the difference between the two. Joseph walked with God. We don't actually read that, but I'm sure he did. You know, we have the example of Enoch and Noah, who in their time of temptation and unrighteousness walked with God. I'm sure Joseph knew how holy God was. We are very fortunate today in that we have the whole scriptures to look at, whereas Joseph didn't. But in 1 Corinthians 10:13, we read that no temptation has overtaken you except that such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Joseph knew the example of his father, Jacob, because Jacob had met God. He knew the example of his grandfather, Isaac, and he'd heard the stories about Abraham. And I'm sure, although perhaps it wasn't written down like we have today, it must have been recorded in some way for Moses to be able to write these stories. But he walked with God. He knew the scriptures in those days. I mean, we're fortunate today in that we have Moses' commandments in Exodus 20, verse 14 and 17. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. We have many scriptures in the Bible which tell us which way we should go. I do remember when Moses was speaking to Joshua, he said, "Be strong and of good courage, and do not fear nor be afraid of them. For the Lord your God, he is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you." And we have those wonderful words in Hebrews chapter 13. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I'll not fear, what can man do to me? Joseph was like that. He knew that he could rely upon his God. He knew that what God had said in the scriptures and what God had commanded right the way back from creation, that a man should leave his mother and wife and be mother and father and be joined to his wife. Joseph knew that. And he could have given way to temptation quite easily. I don't know if you've been watching the series like Downton Abbey, upstairs and downstairs, and all the affairs that went on. People covered it up or tried to cover it up. But then, you know, sin always has results, doesn't it? But no, Joseph ran away from temptations. He was prepared to take the consequences of his actions. Then just look at his wife. She was idolatrous. She was immoral. She had no spiritual guidance. But James 1:13 says, let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desire and enticed. You see, she couldn't take rejection. We read that comment, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. She tried to get her own back on Joseph, didn't she? She told lies. She gave a false accusation. Notice that Joseph didn't argue. He didn't stand up for himself. He didn't question God. What a trust in God. What an example for us. He was being toughened up and prepared for what lay ahead. I expect Joseph would have loved to have known what was going on in God's mind. He would love to have known the future. He would love to have seen beyond today. Do you remember that old Negro spiritual? If we could see beyond today, as God can see, if all the clouds should roll away, the shadows flee, or present grief we would not fret, each sorrow we would soon forget, for many joys are waiting yet for you and me. If we could know beyond today as God does know, why dearest treasures pass away and tears must flow, and why the darkness leads to light, why dreary days will soon grow bright. Someday life's wrongs will be made right. Faith tells us so. If we could see, if we could know, we often say, but God in love a veil to throw across our way. We cannot see what lies before, and so we cling to him the more. He leads us till life is o'er. Trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. Yes, Joseph had to pay for that. He was put into prison. He didn't deserve it, yet it was in God's purpose and God's plan, as we shall see in future weeks, as we see what happened to our friend Joseph. So may the Lord bless you for the rest of today, and we trust that you may enjoy these wonderful stories about Joseph. Amen.